Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social Podcast. Today we're going to be discussing the influence of the IOC election for cyclocross and its state around the current ambition to join the Winter Olympics. We wrote a Substack article about this, I would say that's 3 weeks ago now, maybe 4. The election was last week, so we'll cover that. But before we do that, we'll have to touch upon Milan-San Remo very briefly, and with me here to do that is Issam.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Issam, as said, we're going to start by touching upon Milan-San Remo, the first women's edition in 20 years. Return of that race on the calendar. The first men's race with an attack going to the finish from the Cipressa, I believe, since 1996 or something like that. Of course, not a solo attack, but 2 very entertaining races. La Primavera barely ever disappoints. Let's start with that men's race. It was quite nice. It was almost like I was watching a cyclocross race, but then with Pogačar and the role of Van Aert, and they kept attacking each other, just relentless attacking, and then it came down to a sprint. Honestly, for some reason, it gave me a bit of Hogerheide World Championships vibes with just punch after punch after punch, but eventually a sprint.
Yeah, and a killer in Van der Poel being in that position again and deciding when to go and you know, finishing it off in style. And yeah, it was not the race that you normally expect to see in San Remo, but we knew with Pogačar and the team that he had that they were definitely going to try and stir things up on the Cipressa, and that is what he did, and made clear that if Pogačar was going, that he was probably going to be in his wheel following if he had the energy to do so, and he had. At some point, it looked like he was going to be in difficulties on the Poggio, but then he had that counter, and then you basically knew that it was most likely going to end in a sprint between the 2 or 3, because Ghana was there behind. And yeah, it was special, I have to say. I mean, I was really enjoying that race. At the end of it, you look at Van der Poel and you look at the wins that he had already. I think if you look at, you know, the Palmares and everything that he has achieved already, I think that this one is also just, you know, it adds up to his career nicely. And it's there are many that are not going to be able to achieve what he achieved so far, and he has still a couple of years in him, most likely, if everything goes well. So crazy. And to think that these two, at least Van der Poel and Pogačar, will meet each other a couple of times in the Spring Classics, I think that is definitely a very beautiful sight ahead of us.
I have sometimes been a bit critical or skeptical about the domination of these freaks, if we are going to call them that, just these super athletes. Pogačar, Van der Poel, Vingegaard goes into that same category. When they're just by themselves, they dominate racing in a way that I don't really find entertaining. But when they do meet and they are evenly matched, like here in San Remo, it's fantastic to watch. It's an absolute all-timer. I don't know, for some reason the race just gave me some cyclocross vibes. Just the attack after attack after attack. Felt a little bit like I was watching a old school race in Diegem, or maybe even, dare I say, the Hogerheide World Championships. But it was fantastic. We'll see how Van der Poel holds up on the Flemish hills. I mean, there's a few more of them. They're a bit steeper. I would imagine that Pogačar has a very good shot at for sure winning the Tour of Flanders. We'll see about A3 and Gent-Wevelgem, but overall I enjoyed it, and I also enjoyed the women's race, Issam. It was a different dynamic, some questionable tactics, and I think we should focus on the cyclocross riders. Vos, who had a decent cyclocross season but missed the World Championships, finished second here. I don't think she could have done much more in that sprint. Wiebes was just too fast. She launched a bit early, but it was in the moment the right thing to do. Pieterse, for her part, raced fairly decent, but she got blocked by, I believe it was Niewiadoma or Uttrup Ludwig on the Poggio, and that put her back. She was planning a bit of a downhill attack, it appeared, but I don't think it would have mattered for the outcome of the race. Not really a good race for Pieterse to try and win at the moment. She lacks explosiveness.
Yeah, and I think it should have been a different type of race for Peterson to have an opportunity. I think it was just a little bit too, it was very close, the racing, and then it's just going to be very difficult to get away. And she tried it in the downhill, but it's then just a bit more difficult to get a gap. You really need to have 2 or 3 behind you, just giving you that gap in a way, and then make something out of it. But Pizza never really got that opportunity, and so that was really it. And for Vos, as you say, it was maximizing. With Vivas, you just know that it's just going to be very difficult in a sprint. I think that launching a little early, that was the closest she would have gotten. I think that if it was going to be a sprint where she launched equally with Vibus, it was going to be probably a bigger gap. So I think that Vos is definitely not going to be that happy with the result, but I think she maximized it, and it looks like we're going to see more from Vos this season, and it's just incredible to see. I don't want to repeat the age, but it's incredible. It's really remarkable that at this stage of her career, she's still able to fight for wins, be there at the front, and fight the very best.
A few other noteworthy things from the results. Noemi Ruek is having a really strong season, finished 9th in the Strade, 6th in Trofeo Binda, and now 3rd here in Milan-San Remo despite being blocked. She has cut back her cyclocross program near enough completely, but I do remember from quite a few seasons ago, she was one of the better Swiss woman riders. I recall her at the World Championships in Dubendorf for some reason. I don't really remember where she ended up there, but I just remember the Swiss fans there going crazy with their cowbells. Prevot is having a very good season after what didn't really look like a promising start in the UAE Tour. Of course, that's early on and a lot can change. She came 4th today, but then got relegated to 12th. She was also good in the Strade race. We didn't really cover that much. And yeah, finally, Kat Ferguson, decent results. She's been sick, 18th, not a shame. Imogen Wolf was able to follow quite long, only dropped on the Poggio, 33rd in the end. But now let's move to our talking point, Issam, the IOC elections and the influence this has on cyclocross. It's probably going to turn into more of a discussion answering some questions about cyclocross at the Winter Olympics. But first, let me just start by asking you a question, because I find it quite weird that the most influential or the second most influential position in sports is decided, it's voted upon behind closed doors. There's no cameras allowed, no TV. The selection committee, or the people who are eligible to vote, are 109 people from a variety of countries, but not every country has one vote. There is no equal representation. There are 16 people from Africa that have voting rights. There are 38 from Europe. It's imbalanced. It's not transparent. The campaigning rules for this are super, super vague. You're not allowed to criticize your opponent. You're not allowed to debate your opponent. You can give a single presentation to all the IOC members, which is not allowed to be recorded. It's very, very untransparent, and that for a position that is so powerful.
Yeah, it's a bit shady, but it's bureaucracy. There is a lot of, a lot of stake in a way. If you look at other organizations in sports, it's normally quite transparent and very open, especially if we talk about elections. Apparently with the IOC, it's just not really the case, and we basically got then the news report on the results and everything and how it played out in terms of votes. But I don't know. It's for me, the IOC is an organization that at times has there have been some questionable things happening there, and I think that if you have nothing really to hide, it would be better to be transparent and show everything and have a system that somewhat works. It's difficult, For example, the FIFA we have seen, they are way more transparent and everything. They try to be very open in terms of elections and everything, and strange things have happened there. So it's it doesn't necessarily mean that if everything is behind closed doors, it's not a good sign. But the signs that we got, it at least for myself, if I speak for myself, sometimes there are some things not really aligning with what should happen.
No, and you're completely right to point that out, Issam. Transparency doesn't equal that everything is good or as it should be. FIFA has had corruption scandals. The UCI has had corruption scandals. There was a quid pro quo between the then UCI president Hein Verbrugge and Lance Armstrong. Armstrong made payments. The UCI tipped him off for anti-doping controls, and that money was actually supposed to go to anti-doping controls. Things went further. Armstrong gave the executive board members certain watches and other Livestrong items, and several of his positive tests were covered up. So I'm not to say that transparency is the ultimate solution, but it would help, because if you follow the process here of the IOC election, then I'm basing myself off the insiders, what they wrote. So Sportschau in Germany has had quite extensive coverage. The New York Times, like the big papers, cover on this because it's a really big influential position. Coe was mentioned as frontrunner early on. He had the most clear manifesto. He had a really good reputation. He actually did things. He realized change for good or for bad, depending on who you ask, but he had shown things at World Athletics. But then the politics kind of got involved, and all of a sudden Coventry, who eventually won, was mentioned as a serious candidate. She wasn't taken serious at all in the beginning because her manifesto was 25 pages, it said nothing, she didn't really have a message, but she became the legacy candidate of the outgoing president Bach. And Bach went way past and beyond ethical boundaries, but also just the legal boundaries of what was allowed in campaign, and arranged a secret meeting with the African voting delegates to pretty much whip them, get them in the box, vote for Coventry, and he did that with others as well, as ensuring Coventry of a really good position coming into the elections. The person who finished second, Sarah Manj, that's another example of the politics getting involved. He does have a bit more of a reputation. Coventry comes from a different background. She hasn't worked for sports organizations. She is instead the Minister of Sport of Zimbabwe, which is a whole nother problem because that's a dictatorial regime. It's on the sanction list of the US and Europe. They killed their biggest political opponent in 2018. They frauded with the other elections that were held after there. She got a $100,000 bonus grant from the then dictator Robert Mugabe after winning Olympic medals, and said about that now every country has their problems. She did donate that money to charity, but the affiliations there with dictatorial regimes are there, and personally I think that should not be somebody that should be running for an influential position like this. But back to Sarah Manj, the guy who eventually finished second in the first round, and that was the only round of voting. The reason that his campaign gained that much traction later on was because the Chinese were backing him. So you can see there's an influential position, and there's people trying to get their interests best represented, be it the outgoing president who wants to defend his legacy, be it different nations that want to have more influence on sport. And those are things that I think should be better protected for a position that is as important as this one is. But yeah, it also doesn't really surprise me, you know, it is what it is, and we know that with these organizations, politics always play a much larger role than that they should.
No, and the stakes are high, yeah? So it's, everyone wants to have some influence, as you said. The Chinese were involved as well, and Bach tried to have his push in terms of trying to get Coventry in a very good position, and you know, before all this was happening, Coe was the prominent favorite, or at least was the one in which a lot of people were thinking that he would be the one winning the election in the end. And to be honest, I was thinking the same thing, but it's not only your vision, I guess, it's also you gotta be smart, you gotta know who is going to be backing you, and at times you have to give up things to get things done, and I think that both Samaranch and Coventry were very smart in that regard, and they were also the ones with significantly more votes than the rest. And you know, if you look at Coe and his 8 votes, I think that is definitely not the amount of votes, if you look into the amount that you could get, that I expected. But that's how it goes at times, and it's a situation we have to deal with because it's the reality now.
Then we come to what is the influence of this on cyclocross. Co and Lapartient, we wrote about that on our Substack about a month ago now. It would have been good news for cyclocross if they had been elected. These are the two men who are driving the bid for cross-country running and cyclocross to be included at the 2030 Olympics, and they pledged to seek expansion for the Winter Olympics beyond snow and ice events for their term. They didn't get elected. With Coventry, the status quo candidate of Bach got elected. However, perhaps some sort of silver lining in this, Issam, is that after months and months of giving interviews and presentations saying she would change absolutely nothing, the only thing she would change was protect women's sport, out with the transgenders, big issue facing sports. That's the only point of difference she made between herself and the agenda of Bach. She gave an interview to the New York Times where she was finally pressed 2 days before the election. The Athletic, that should be what I'm saying, but she told them that she was open to changes for the Winter Olympics because she thinks commercially it makes more sense to expand the number of sports. So perhaps that's then the silver lining in this, what I would describe as quite negative. My preferred candidate was Co.
To be honest, I think, in terms of lobbying, that will most likely continue, and we will see where that will end up. I think it would have been easier if you had a Co or Lapartien up there as president, but I think that right now they have to continue to push and lobby to be part of the 2030 Olympics, at least if that is possible, and I think that it is still possible. It's just, it's going to be now a bit more difficult because you're not going to have the head of the IOC pushing for it, or at least advocating for it or bringing it forward. So we have to wait and see how that will play out, but I don't know when we are going to know what is going to happen in that regard, but hopefully we will find out soon.
I think we should differentiate between 2030 and then the long term. Let's start then on the short term with those 2030 Olympics, Issam, because those are held in France. Lapartient is the head of the French National Olympic Committee, among various palette of things that he does. But for those Olympics, I am cautiously optimistic that cyclocross is going to be on the program. Michel Barnier, the former French Prime Minister, who reports to the new French government on the organizing committee of the 2030 Olympics, he said that he can see cyclocross being added to the program together with the cross-country running, of course. That's kind of a combined bid, a push by Co and Lapartien to get that on the program, but that can be temporary. Breakdancing was added to the Paris Olympics, but that was only added at the request of the organizer. The local organizer has the right to add a number of sports, demonstration sports, real sports, but that doesn't mean they get added to the permanent program. For instance, at the LA Olympics, we will see flag football, but the odds of flag football returning to the Brisbane Olympics are near enough zero. This is a construction in which cyclocross can be added, and I am cautiously optimistic because if you look at the other sports that have put forward bids, they're not as appealing for France to add. For instance, ice wall climbing and these things that require specific venues. France seems pretty open to that idea for 2030, with Besançon already coming forward as potential venue if snow is not a necessity.
Yeah, I think that is definitely interesting. If snow would not be a requirement in terms of surface and event, then I think that Besançon would be an interesting venue to hold it. And I think that cyclocross has to focus maybe on the short term first, seize the opportunity and see what happens, and from there try and, if it's a success and you can showcase that the sport is growing, I think that would be a very good start And then from there you can see what will happen in terms of the long term. And it will not always be easy to have cyclocross at the Olympics, but I think that it would be a very good start if it would already be allowed to be held in 2030. And I think it just has to happen once. And then when it happens once, maybe from there the ball can get rolling and we can get more Olympic editions for cyclocross. And I think it's just, I'm not saying that if it would be Olympic, everything is solved and the sport will grow gigantically. And I don't think that will be the case. But I just feel that the resources would increase. If I compare it, for example, to boxing, which I think a year or two was in discussion of getting off the Olympics in 28 in LA. But now it has been added because the World Boxing Association is now stepping in and they have official organizers instead of the IBA, or I don't know who it was. But it's just, if you look at the amount of money that is spent on boxing, for example, for Team GB, if it wasn't an Olympic sport, it would never really get the investment that they're getting right now. But because it's Olympic, they can get those resources one way or the other. And then from there, you can really work on a foundation and make sure that the sport is evolving and the athletes get the good resources and they can really work. With cyclocross, in certain countries, that could definitely play a role. And if it's Olympic, then maybe it will get the funding that it normally wouldn't get. And maybe at that point, athletes from certain countries could make that step and just get better and have a more equal playing field. And I hope that is really what can happen with cyclocross if it gets in the Olympics. But, we have to wait and see.
I agree with your overall vision. And that's really something for the long term. If it gets added on the long term, all those processes can start developing. There can be some organizational learning. Federations can improve. And it will eventually, hopefully, spiral. But for that, it first needs to be added in 2030. I, as said, do think it's likely. Barnier has pretty much endorsed this after he visited the Leeuwen Worlds. He was really impressed. And rightfully so. I think I saw him somewhere in the VIP from the other side, but I don't fully know. A lot of French politicians were attending and they tend to look quite a lot like each other, but that's there. Besançon, I think, would make sense as venue. It's a spectacular venue. Question remains, does it need to be on snow? Personally, I'm willing to overlook the fact that that's not fully representative for the sport just because the sport itself would benefit from it. It's still in the works, right? There are possible other venues. I don't think it's that hard to find a cyclocross venue. I think Sisteron used to host a round of the Coupe de France. That's more in proximity of the region that's hosting it. That remains to be seen. So now let's go over some questions. So one of our listeners, viewers, Instagram followers, Substack readers asked, do you think that cyclocross actually belongs at the Winter Olympics? Isn't the number of nationalities competing far too limited?
Yeah, I can see someone making that point, but I think that there are, and I don't have the examples right now, but I know that there are definitely disciplines in which certain countries are just more represented at the front and they take the medals. So I think that shouldn't be an argument per se. I think that you can definitely see it as a weakness, but I don't think that just because you have basically Belgium and the Netherlands being very represented at the front, especially on the men's side, and on the women's side is mainly the Dutch women that are there at the front currently. I don't think that because of that, all of a sudden it should not become Olympic. I think for one, you can definitely make sure that the entry limit for those countries is limited and not what it is right now, which is 8 or 9. There are certain things that you could do to make it more appealing for other countries to have an entry in, to fight for potential top 10 or top 15. So I wouldn't say necessarily that just because that is currently the case that it should not be an Olympic sport. I don't think I think that argument is in my opinion a little weak.
To an extent, it's a chicken-egg discussion. what's going to come first, the Olympic funding, and is then the international appeal going to increase, or does it need to be international to become Olympic? Personally, I think a lot of international appeal will come through the Olympics. And you mentioned that you didn't really have any examples. Well, I do. Nordic combined, that's not really an international sport. That doesn't even have a women's event, and it's a total joke that that's still possible in this date and time and in this age. The Germans have a firm grip on the sleighing sports. They especially dominate the luge discipline. Speed skating, the long ring, is quite dominated by the Dutch, although there have been a few other nations coming up in recent years. But to avoid the utter domination, what you see is that there's quite strict quota, right? The number of athletes that can participate per distance or per discipline is reduced significantly at the Olympics. Look at the tiny size of the mountain bike fields, and that artificially multinationalizes the top tens of these events when you compare them from the Olympics to the World Cups. I can get the point. I'm not going to make the case here that cyclocross is going to be the most international Olympic discipline, but especially on the women's side, I do feel like there is a reasonable case to be made that it's on par with a number of other sports that are at the Olympics. Then the second question that we have is, what about funding? Cyclocross is a very expensive sport. It's expensive, you need bikes, you need mechanics. This would be beyond many nations. How many nations would step in, and how does this compare to other winter sports in terms of costs of running the program?
It is expensive, for sure. I feel that it's not that expensive, right? I mean, I would definitely see that the countries that are currently, that have a certain base, those are definitely the countries that will easily be able to have their riders participate in the Olympics. I don't think that you will get a lot of interest from countries that are currently not even really interested in cyclocross and don't really have a delegation in that regard. But I think that if you would have the Olympics for a couple of editions and in terms of cyclocross, and you have more than one edition, I think then that could definitely change certain countries' view on cyclocross, and they would then maybe have the opportunity to have more funding available. And I think because when a sport becomes Olympic, it's just way easier to get the funding. And I think that you're going to see mainly the countries in which road cycling is already having an infrastructure. Those will definitely flourish more and seize the opportunity becoming better in a sport that is Olympic. I think that if you're talking about like new countries stepping in, like maybe countries from Africa, or I think for those it will take way longer before those will ever consider cyclocross, regardless of it being feasible for them in terms of money and spendings. I think that doesn't really matter that much. It's more also going to be the infrastructure, making sure that there is certain knowledge about the sport. And I think that just cycling countries that are normally already quite represented, those will have an advantage over countries that don't even participate in road cycling or are not very advanced in that regard.
Let's start by admitting the fact that Olympic sports in general are elitist activities, hobbies, whatever you want to call it, right? The top performing countries at the Olympics, it's a combination of money and population. At the initial phase, GDP is more significant, and then above a certain GDP level, population becomes more significant. Those were the main factors found to influence medal table results through a number of scientific papers. This is even more the case at the Winter Olympics, because the Winter Olympics are it's a different type of sport, right? At the Summer Olympics, you'll have more accessible sports and more niche sports, more expensive sports. It's more balanced. The Winter Olympics, it's a very specific set of skills that you need. You need to be able to recruit children from a young age in snow doing skiing, downhill skiing, a select number of things, and that's extremely difficult. There are plenty of countries that have money that do invest heavily in getting medals at the Winter Olympics. The Netherlands invests in speed skating because that's part of our culture. But you can see countries like Australia, New Zealand invest in things like freestyle sports because for this they don't need that much snow. They have the possibility to practice these things pretty much inside. They need the ramp or they need a facility, and that's relatively more doable. So in that extent, or to that extent, I do think that what you said, countries that are interested in road cycling or mountain biking or have cross programs like the Czech Republic, like Spain, they will see an incremental boost in Olympic funding because they'll get money from from their national Olympic committees. But you're right in saying that for new countries, it's first of all going to take super long to build a culture, and second of all, it is expensive. A cyclocross program will cost money, but to put it in some perspective, the Netherlands has a curling team that costs 250,000 euros a year. We spend 400,000 on snowboard freestyle. Biathlon costs millions. The US Biathlon Federation has a yearly budget of 2.6 million, and that was quite some years ago, and they're not a biathlon powerhouse. I couldn't find a number for Norway, but a lot of money is spent in those programs. Cyclocross can be cheaper than those. It's more accessible in terms of geography. But then an important perspective to place here is compared to cross-country running, and obviously cross-country running will be significantly more appealing. And then the third question that was posed here was, would it pull in more commercial sponsors? Issam, what do you think?
I think in general it will. I think the main reason for that is because it lends a bit more perspective, I guess, because you can basically say that you will commit for 4 years or 3 years towards the Olympics in a way. I think that it's for certain companies just a bit more attractive because then they can basically say, okay, we're going to try and commit to the success of certain athletes and we are willing to do so for, an X amount. It would definitely give an impulse. It's hard to judge how much that will be and how that will look like, but if you look at mountain bike, for example, you can clearly see that at times there are basically teams that didn't really exist, and then all of a sudden they pick up certain riders and they go into this trajectory of 4 years towards an Olympics. They find the sponsors, and at times, sponsors that are not from the countries the athletes are from, but they just want to commit and be part of the Olympics because it has something, it's in terms of marketing and all that. The reward is quite high in terms of being part of an Olympic program, or at least a project towards the Olympics. And I think that impulse could definitely help it for companies to be more attractive to invest in cyclocross if it becomes Olympic.
I am doing a degree in marketing management, my master's degree, and from what I've read, I do think that the Olympics have a really big impact on sports marketing and is a real appeal because it gives you 4 years of bragging rights as a sponsor. You can see it quite a bit in mountain biking, as you say, through teams and through fabrication projects. In mountain biking, a lot of sponsorship comes from bike manufacturers because mountain bikes are super popular over the world. If you buy a bike in Colombia or Latin America, also large parts of Africa, Asia, you buy a mountain bike. You don't really buy a road bike because mountain bike is all-terrain, very popular for commuting and stuff. So that makes a lot of sense. At the same time, I do want to warn, and I know you said this earlier, but just becoming Olympic won't solve every single problem that cyclocross has. The world champion Skeleton is from the Netherlands. She's a pioneer. She's the first Dutch athlete to win a medal at the Winter Olympics in a sleighing sport for the Netherlands. She's world champion, okay? Bronze medalist at the last World Championships. How does she make around? How does she make a living? She has some sponsorships. She gets a €80,000 grant from the Dutch Sports Institute. She works in the summer, which she then saves up and spends on her season. She has a paid newsletter where there are people paying for extra updates and Q&A sessions with her. And then she has hustled a number of extra sponsors and donors. That's not really a luxurious life for somebody who is one of the best, and at the moment, the best athlete in the world of her sport. So cyclocross, even if it becomes Olympic and attracts more sponsors, it's not necessarily going to be easy. But here's one of the reasons I think that cyclocross should be there, because it is commercially so much stronger than a sport like skeleton and then a sport like the Nordic combined. Lots of these sports, and don't get me wrong, there are big winter sports, and some like short track are super big in Asia, but others like biathlon are super big across Europe, and I'm super jealous of the way that biathlon has organized their TV distribution and their TV broadcast and the graphics and the whatnot that they have, the pre-show, the post-show, the interviews in the race, everything. It's really good. But there are also a lot of winter sports that are quite small, and cyclocross is significantly bigger than, even though they are only really a big sport in Netherlands and Belgium, and then a modest sport in a few other Central European countries. Continuing the list of questions, one of the followers on Instagram, Issam, asked, what do we think will happen with the races if cyclocross becomes part of the Winter Olympics? Is the type of racing going to significantly shift to alpine countries, that we get a lot of racing on snow and ice?
Well, I think that depends on what the requirements will be in the next Olympics. If it becomes an Olympic discipline, I think that will play a role. If it's not required to be held on snow and ice, I don't think that it's then going to change that much. However, I think that in terms of interest for certain, from certain countries, might increase by it being Olympic, because they want to be part of the whole preparation, and it could help. I'm not saying that it will, all of a sudden we will have now a World Cup. There will be actually a World Cup instead of a bit of your Europe Cup in a way, and I don't think that will immediately be the solution, and you will see it in the first couple of years. But I think it will eventually be more attractive for certain countries to have their own race, because they want to, they're maybe in a certain development, and they think that it would help their local riders. And I think that could be the shift that we might see in terms of calendar and races. I think a lot depends on the criteria for the surface in which the race has to be held on. I think we could see maybe riders specifically train for it more when the Olympic year arrives, but it's hard to judge in a way, because we don't really know what will happen. But that's my take on it.
It was an interesting perspective, one that I hadn't considered at all before, so I put some thought into it, and I have a few thoughts. So my first one is that if cyclocross is mandated to be on snow and ice, it will hurt the potential of the sport. For instance, let's take Brazil as an example, a country with mountain bike culture. For them, it's much easier to step in if this sport doesn't have the requirement of snow and ice when it does, because it's just an extra barrier. Yes, you can train cyclocross on technical courses, faster courses. In Brazil, you probably can also find a couple of muddy courses there where you can hold the races and practice skills, but that's a whole different level from snow, and it couldn't be a reason for a federation to not invest in it. So that would be a downside, and I personally hope that cyclocross just gets added in the most pure form. Just whatever the conditions are, we race them. That's what I like about cyclocross. No two races are the same. Conditions, courses, everything factors in. I like that a lot. So that would be the best, and for the Winter Olympics it would make most sense, because they aren't limited to the commercial or the commercial factor of the Winter Olympics is increased because they have a number of different sports that draw people from different countries, etc. Then I do think, back to the original question, what would happen with the race venues, there is some merit to the idea that we'll see more snow races. If these countries that then in snow and ice conditions can put up a cross program, I'm thinking maybe a revival in Switzerland, maybe some more races in the French Alps. Austria perhaps wants to revitalize this program. Czech Republic, we could see something like that, races on snow or on artificial snow. Biathlon venues have hosted World Cups mountain biking before. Nove Mesto has won. Lenzerheide switched from mountain biking to biathlon. We've seen, for instance, in Val di Sol, not a World Cup mountain bike, it's a World Cup mountain bike, but not a World Cup biathlon venue. Some very interesting crossovers there that could be a possibility. But before any of that really gets resolved, we need to figure out what happens with surface. Does cyclocross get added for the 2030 Olympics? And is that then a foot in the door, or is it a one-time thing that's very nice for the riders that are good then? The next question ties into this long-term vision. Should cyclocross even want to tie its future or part of it to the Winter Olympics, considering the fact that climate change is an existential threat to these Winter Olympics? The person who asked this question wrote that he noted in the manifestos of the candidates that they spoke about global warming rather than climate change, strengthening his view that the Winter Olympics are a dying fossil and that it would be bad business for cyclocross to attach its future or try and leverage from that. What do you think, Issam?
I think for now they should. We don't know. We don't know what will happen in the future. I think there has to be a realistic stance from cyclocross as a discipline in that regard. And as I said, I don't think that the sport should look at the Olympics as the solution to all the problems that we have. It kind of shows that the Olympics itself, and especially the Winter Olympics, is not perfect. We might end up with Saudi Arabia all of a sudden somewhere organizing the Winter Olympics, trying to bring fake snow or whatever they're going to try to do. But I think that the sport has to be critical and look into the possibilities. And that critical stand is something that I hope the IOC itself will also have, and try to be sustainable in the sense that try to pursue locations that make sense. And who knows, maybe we might end up with an Olympics that will be held in several countries instead of only one, and with venues all over the place. And it's tricky as well. I think that is also really one that is relying a lot of foreign factors, and it's just a bit hard to predict where that will be going. I think that in general the sport should not be looking at the Olympics as the one that will solve the problems that we have. It needs to look at the Olympics as something that could enhance the sport and make it better, but not as the only way for the sport to continue. I think that the sport has a lot that they could change without being an Olympic discipline. And to be honest, they can start from today. That's not something that is really dependent on the Olympics, in my opinion.
The Winter Olympics are not the magic bean for cyclocross, and while climate change poses an existential threat to the Winter Olympics, I do think that because in the nature it is a highly commercial event, the second most commercial event of the IOC, they're going to pursue the Winter Olympics as long as they possibly can. And while the issue is really for the snowbound events, the ice events will likely be able to continue quite long. Speed skating is indoor in a cooled arena, which has become increasingly more efficient. These sleighing tracks, those are not that bound to the climate. They'll keep pushing for the Winter Olympics in some way or form. You mentioned some things about potentially putting up venues in different countries. That's especially a thing that's mentioned a lot for speed skating, because building a complete speed skating arena for that is extremely costly, and there's very hard to find a new purpose for that once it's finished. And that's ultimately the problem with a lot of these things for the Winter Olympics. Building infrastructure for ski jumping, building infrastructure for short track and ice hockey, it's extremely costly and you can't really use it for much else. So unless your long-term plan is to consistently put up those events in World Cups, World Championships, then it's really not worth your investment. But this is where I think that the Winter Olympics should adapt themselves. They should be open to other sports, cross-country running and cyclocross, but also to other sports that are played in the winter, like maybe indoor football, bandy. There are a number of winter sports, and you can potentially consider some sports that are currently being held in the Summer Olympics but are more winter seasonal sports. Try and shift them, because that way you can make the Winter Olympics a bigger success. It will draw more eyes to the event, meaning that it will become worth investing in for cities. And that's not to say that I don't think they are facing issues and that they haven't been taken serious enough in recent years. But I do think that at the end of the day, the Winter Olympics will continue because it's such a commercial event, and I just can't see the IOC turn that down. They'll just keep pushing in whatever form possible. One of the things they said is that they would just look for 5 cities that can keep hosting the Winter Olympics in rotation, where climate change is going to not be sufficient enough in the next 150 years for them to keep going. So I think that's pretty much all that you need to know about the ambitions of the IOC. Then the final question, and I think we can take a little bit of time to discuss this through a variety of different ideas, is if cyclocross is not to hitch its future on the Winter Olympics, but use it as a tool and for the rest improve its sport, what are a few improvements you two would like to see?
Do you have an hour? No, but I would like to see a variety of changes. I think that in terms of broadcasting, I think that there is a lot of things that can be tried. I think that innovation is definitely something that I would like to see more in cyclocross. Things like night races definitely should be tried and to be pursued. I think that they always have a certain vibe. I think that definitely if you look into cyclocross, I don't know if they are maybe traditionalists in a way, or they are maybe don't want to take the risk, but I think that there is definitely a fan base that is a bit untouched that maybe should be tried to be pursued. I don't think that you should be only looking into the standard cyclocross fan in a way. I think that you should be open for a broader fan base. The social media appearance should be improved. There are. I think that those in terms of aesthetics and reach, there for me at least, I feel that is definitely a problem. And sure, then at that point I can go about the World Cup and the issues that we have there currently. And I think that also in terms of sponsorships, we definitely see in terms of races not really being able to really have their own initiative in terms of what they want to have as a sponsor. There are too many criterias, and I think that hampers the vision of the organizers a little bit. There are definitely things that for me the list is going to be long because I'm going to be discussing from one point to the other. But to cut it short, maybe I think for me at least, I would focus first on the reach and try to make the sport more appealing to a broader audience. I think there should be a lot of focus on that, because I feel that if you would be able to reach new fan base and you're able to widen your fan base, I think that there lays a lot. There might be that one boy or girl that is watching and then decides to pick up the sport of cyclocross, and I think that is just and in terms of money, it's also very good if your sport is being seen a lot, and for sponsors it's also a very good thing, and maybe you attract sponsors that normally would never be interested in cyclocross. So I think I would like to see that to be tackled mainly, and then of course obviously in terms of maybe try to move the focus a little bit away, slightly move it a little bit away from Belgium and focus more on certain countries where the potential is there. but it's just really the financial hampering for those countries to organize a race. I think that, those kind of things that I would like to see being changed. I think the sport is broken in many ways, but it's a lovely sport. And I think that it needs it needs a lot of fixing. I think that you can be, you can always try and try to improve the sport. It needs to be done step by step. And I would look into the reach side of it and try to widen your fan base.
So that's ultimately what's at the core of the point becoming part of the Winter Olympics, right? Increasing your reach. So I did think about that as well, and I have some points here written down on marketing. Their marketing needs to become more modern and more out of the box. At the moment, their marketing, I would argue, is extremely inefficient. They spend money on paid advertisements on Google search. When you Google Cyclocross World Cup tickets, they have an advert there, even though they are the top link, which means they're paying for nothing. You need to buy that on different terms, like buy it when people Google for Cyclocross 24 or whatnot. Don't buy it for literally where people will know that they already come. That's extremely inefficient. They can do with some more thinking in terms of how can we make cyclocross a product that reaches people that normally wouldn't reach us. A few things, Issam, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, what I came up with. And this is mainly related to their YouTube part, right? So part 1, redefining their highlights. Their highlights at the moment are just cutouts from the race, and while that's okay, it doesn't always capture the atmosphere. They have videographers on the ground. Why don't you use some of that footage from course side, from between the fans, with flares, with atmosphere and such, to better capture the atmosphere and portray that to people who are watching the highlights? Considering YouTube, I think they should also try and investigate partnerships with existing YouTubers, Instagrammers, TikTokers to reach a younger audience. For instance, there are a lot of sports culture vloggers, is what I'll call them, on YouTube. They film themselves when they go to football matches, and occasionally they'll visit other sports events, or they'll film their reaction to sports like Formula 1, even if that's not their primary sport that they cover. There is a great culture at cyclocross. Why don't you invite some of these people to one of your races where you know there's going to be a great attendance, where you know there will be something, and have them react to that? You'll reach their followers. These videos are typically quite well watched. Finally, another potential collaboration is with this influencer called The Padded Seat. What he does, and he's been doing this for over a few years now, is go to sports events. He started in football, where he would go into the VIP, and he makes a video about the VIP experience. That's pretty much it. But these videos are extremely well watched. From football, he's ventured into a variety of different sports, and I would argue that even though the cyclocross VIP can be a bit lousy from time to time, just give him the fanciest package there is, put him there at a table with a few interesting people, former cyclocross riders, have him come to course side, have him experience just the experience, and that's over 1 million followers he has. Like, that's a great audience for cyclocross to reach.
I think we're pretty much in line. I think that we are pretty much in line. Those are definitely ways to improve your reach. I think if you look, for example, at the YouTube side of it, I think that it's quite comparable to where F1 was before Liberty Media entered F1 and became the owner and was responsible for the rights. Because before that, F1 on YouTube was not it, to be honest. And I think that if you look right now, the improvements they have made on their social media, but also mainly on their YouTube as well, I think is remarkable, and is definitely something other sports could learn from. It's not really that they were innovative with their way of doing things, because I think that they, for a big part, they were basically copying, for example, what football was doing in terms of, beginning of the stage, trying to have those match highlights and all that, and and try to extract videos out of a match, and try to be trending. But F1 was really on it, and a lot of credit is given to Drive to Survive and the series and all that. But I think that if you look at their social media presence, how it was before, I would say 2016, 2017, and how much it improved over the years, I think that is definitely something cyclocross can learn from quite a lot. And it almost feels like the argument that the sport is giving itself is like, oh, we're not really that big of a sport. I think they need to get off that whole mentality. I think that you need to aspire yourself as a sport to become bigger. And I think that if you are just going to stick with what you have and be happy with what you have and say, oh yeah, look, we had 15,000 here, we had 10,000 here in terms of spectators, that should not be it. You should be really looking into a variety of packages that you could maybe offer to the fans. I don't know, but be creative. And it's the creativity at the moment that is really lacking in that department. So, hopefully that is definitely something where cyclocross could work on. And there are slight improvements, but it's far from being solved, in my opinion.
There are some improvements, and the social media of the World Cup has become better since Flanders Classics took over. Every year they improve a bit, but I'm still not a fan. For one, there should be clear differentiation between Super Prestige and World Cups. It should be clear what is a World Cup, what is a Super Prestige. They look exactly like each other, and I don't like that. They have the same intro tune, they have the same course map, they have the same pretty much every single thing except the color scheme. They put the LEDs on red and they put them on yellow. The Instagram is run the exact same way, with often quite meaningless posts like statement made or this is what it means, and then just no coverage of the actual race, nothing there. Those are things that can still improve. Their social media can improve. Another thing I'll credit in positive change is the increased commercialization of the cyclocross course with these LED banners, with interesting placement of them, like at the back of a straightaway. They have improved that. So those are two positive things, but you tap into a very, very good point with the market differentiation, Issam, because that hasn't been happening enough in cyclocross. How can you differentiate in ticket prices? Well, you have VIP packages, but the VIPs are the ideal place to differentiate even more. Have VIPs Deluxe, have VIPs Superior. That's something they do in Benidorm quite well. They have different VIP packages with different levels, one quite affordable level. I think you only pay 30 or 40 euros for that, and it's completely sold out. It's this area right next to the finish under the Red Bull tent. And then you have the VIP Deluxe, which is the more standard VIP package where the entrepreneurs go for business meetings and those type of things. But it was a long queue there for the last VIP tickets on the day of the Benidorm World Cup this year. They were selling them at the door of the VIP. It works great because some people do want to pay to sit. You can work with grandstands. They had some standing stands in Tabor, great atmosphere. I know in Hulst they have stands which they're charging more for. That's probably a little bit over the top for most races, but you can work with a grandstand or two. You mentioned that in F1 you can buy a paddock pass. You can walk through the paddock. You can sell that as most expensive package here, and then you arrange something. These are all ways that you can increase revenue from your events, and that would be necessary if you don't really want to rely on Olympic funding. A few other points. TV, it's, I would argue, tough, because I know in the UK, for instance, everything has gone to the expensive TNT package now. This is something that is a challenge all over marketing, especially if you're in political marketing and those fields with the fragmented media landscape. Fewer people watch TV. Streaming services don't always have ads, and if they do, then it's a limited number of people seeing them. People all have subscribed to different packages from different TV providers, from different streaming services, making it hard to reach people. Ultimately, like, the best is, of course, if this is free to air, but I also understand that it's not really realistic, but it does hurt cycling as a product that it's super expensive to watch in the UK, because it is a sport more for casual viewers who don't necessarily watch everything but watch part of it. So those are, I think, my key points here. And then a final thing is storytelling. Drive to Survive is an example which you mentioned. I think, as you said, the effect of it is overrated. There have been a wide variety of changes made by Liberty Media. Drive to Survive was one of them, but storytelling is very powerful. The reason why Thibaut Nys is so popular in Belgium, yes, it's his dad, but it's also the fact that he had a real-life reality series about him on TV. The popularity of Bart Wellens also attributed to that real-life docu comedy soap about his life. All those things contribute to people seeing the sport who normally don't necessarily see it, and also engaging with them. Not everybody watches a sport just because they want to admire peak human athleticism. There are people who want to watch it for the rivalries, for the storylines, for the people in the sport. It's not just about Van der Poel versus Van Aert, or that's a bad example. It wasn't just about Koppie versus Bartoli. It was about the Catholic lifestyle versus the more modern lifestyle. That clash is what inspired so many people in that rivalry, and that's, of course, wasn't really storytelling at the time. But if there are dimensions to this, Hamilton versus Verstappen F1 title fight, the old school legend versus the young new guy on the block who doesn't give a shit about anybody or anything, people are engaged in those stories.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I think that that you need to sell a story, and that is part of entertainment. I think that if you are not able to sell that story, you will struggle a lot. And I think that cyclocross at times struggles to sell the story, and that is something that has to be worked on. And that could be in the form of a series on Netflix, which I don't think can really happen with cyclocross. But I would more love to see behind the scenes, and more focus on the riders, in terms of interview, be a bit more personal, know a little bit more about them. I think that, for example, if you look at World Cups and presence on YouTube, I think that, for example, a pre-show would be beneficial, because, as you say, of course, you have this whole issue with the TV rights and things becoming very expensive, but so have many other sports. And then what they try to do is they try to have a pre-show, they try to have a post-race analysis on YouTube, and that is how you create awareness. And people will tune in, people will look at it, and some might watch 10 seconds and go on with their day, and others might stick around, and that is, you're doing it for the others. So, for example, I'm just now throwing out an example out, but with the youth races, you could maybe broadcast those races, and then after that you say, if you want to watch the elite races, then you can watch it here, and here. But then at least you have attracted people. People will also be interested in the youth races. They will know the future of the sport and be more interested in that as well. I think that would work out great, and I think that the numbers would be well. I think the promotion would be very good, and that is how you grow the sport. I think that it's very difficult with the TV rights and that they're very expensive, but I think that you can work around that, and many other sports have done so. So I don't think that cyclocross should hide behind that, and make it less accessible in a way. I think there are many ways to make the sport more accessible, despite the fact that the prices are so high.
Producing a pre-show shouldn't be too expensive. Same goes for a post-show. It should be doable, and that's what I mentioned earlier with biathlon, what I'm so jealous of. Everything is broadcasted. They put the camera on, they broadcast the shooting practice, they start the broadcast way in advance of the first race. They also rotate the men's and women's races there. It doesn't have an effect on viewing figures. So I would argue that cyclocross should also be open to that. One time the men go first, next time the women go first in the World Cup. That's a minor fix there, but anyway, back to the point, they start well in advance. They do a 30-minute pre-show. They interview several people. They have people talking there. It's the same in mountain bike. Bart Brentjens is always there talking on the course, then rushing his way to the commentary booth. They have a 3-man commentary team. Like, this host feed can be improved significantly, which can improve the viewing experience for people elsewhere, so that you make it in a way that broadcasters from the UK, broadcasters like Eurosport that broadcast all over the world, have a pre-show, have maybe a reporter in the pits, or at the very least just a preview and a debrief. So I think that would be a great addition. And again, when I watch a biathlon episode or a race, I look at that and I'm like, this is great. This is how I would want cyclocross to be as well, because it would be so much more accessible for people and so much better for people who are now watching on Eurosport or on the UCI YouTube channel and just getting the race with commentary starting 3 minutes before the start. So those are some things, and then obviously the product itself can improve in many ways, but I think it's good we mainly focused on the marketing point right now. That's probably most relevant to the Winter Olympics part, and with that we had all the selected questions. Issam, thank you for your time.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for having me. I think it was quite interesting. It was a bit long, but I think that we went through quite a few issues and points, and I think that we made some good points. And who knows? Maybe Flanders Classics is listening, and they can just they can write it down and start working on improving the sport.
Then I'm gonna start preparing an invoice as well. If any of this gets implemented, you can pay us and hire us. No, I'm just kidding. If they do anything with this, which I don't really know if they will, I doubt it. I mean, I do know that we have quite a decent audience and quite a lot of people from within the sport listen to it. But ultimately, it was a nice discussion, and apparently some people like our relatively long episodes. That 2-hour episode about the cyclocross Mount Rushmore is our 15th most listened episode. So yeah, we'll see, and I think we're going to be back in 2 weeks' time to record another podcast after the Tour of Flanders. So thank you.